afternoon, everybody. I'm Dr. Heather Deniston, and with me today on the Junk You Should Know show is Chera Justice, who is a colleague, an inspirator for me, and a friend. Welcome, Chera.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today. It's such an honor.
Oh, you're welcome. As many of you know, the Junk You Should Know show airs live every Friday at noon PST on the Well Fit and Fed page, but it lives on the Well Fit and Fed YouTube channel. So if you guys have missed any shows, and I will tell you, last week's show with Jeanette Brunet was amazing, and you'll want to check that out on YouTube if you didn't get the chance to see it. So we are talking about resilience today. In fact, our title is Resilience, the Power of Getting Up. And some background on Chera is we met at a wellness conference in Washington. She was a keynote speaker there, and she knocked it out of the park. And what I love about it is she said to me after, she said, I actually changed my whole talk right before I went up on stage, which if I did that, I would be sweating and blotchy and stutter over my words. So I was extremely impressed with this woman that she could get up there and she changed it to something that brought the whole audience to tears. So very powerful speaker, and we're going to be getting lots more out of Chera in the coming time. Can I share with them what you just shared with me? That there's there's potentially a podcast on the horizon for Chera, which we were just sort of talking about how to name a podcast. So if any of you guys have crazy cool ideas of how to name something or brand something, please share it in the comments below. For those who are already watching, welcome. I love live viewers. It's the best, but any of you who are watching in replay, I love you just as much. We are going to get going with the content, and thanks for joining, Cynthia. Sister Cynthia has just said that she can hear and see us just fine. I was having some technical difficulties a little bit ago, so thank you for affirming that. So resilience, tell us a little bit about how you got into that nature of work, and then we're going to get into more about defining what that is and why it's important.
Yeah. Well, if I were to think collectively about how I got into this work, it'd be a little bit about my whole life story, really. And I think that's true for everybody who's endured any kind of adversity or trauma, and I think that's everyone. But as I look back and what's kind of stemmed my growth and change and really my passion around this topic, it's been my childhood into my growth and as an adult. Growing up, I grew up in a very small town and to a single mother, and in that there's a lot of challenge in that. And I had some brothers, and I've had brothers who've passed away. I met my father when I was 16. I've experienced homelessness. We lived in a very low socioeconomic status, and really put myself through learning and growing and constantly being in a growth mindset without even really understanding what that meant from a very early age. And as I've gotten older, as I've experienced more hardship in my adult years, I've been able to really quantify that in a way that makes sense and rings true for me. And we can get into all that in a little bit. But that's kind of the cliff notes of how I kind of got here. I started out thinking I wanted to follow this passion and profession really of athletics and fitness. And I love being able to blend both. Thinking critically about behavioral health just as much as physical health and well-being. And I love the opportunity to explore that more in my career.
We are seeing an absolute catalyzing factor of that connection of psychological and behavioral health and physical health and how they're connected. And I'm such I'm very passionate about the idea that we are perpetual motion machines, and that's how it makes our brain fire and makes our brain healthy, and that whole connection. And the idea of resilience, of that kind of bouncing back, can you tell me a little bit about how you define resilience and kind of just share with us a little bit about how that works into the idea of wellness?
Yeah. I think about resilience. I used to think about it a lot as a bounce back, and now I kind of think about it as a bounce forward. And the reason that I changed that in my mind, and it's really only been the past 6 to 8 weeks that I've started to think about it that way, is because I think when we fall down, when we fail, when we experience hardship, the reality is we fall, we fail.
Mhm.
And when you bounce back up, it makes you think that you're going to go right back to where you were before. And the reality is, when you experience challenge, trauma, hardship, and a moment where you need resilience, you're going to bounce forward to a new version of yourself. And that's really important. That was a really important learning curve for me, I think. I'm never going to be who I was before, but I'm always going to keep growing and evolving into who I am now. And it's taken me having to experience those challenging times in my life to be able to do that bouncing forward.
Yeah.
And that little subtle difference in the way that I think about it has really helped me stay on track with that.
I love that. And thank you for sharing that, because that already has put a little mind shift for me. And I think that's absolutely true. I know, going through watching my mother die over a 10-week period and nursing her with my sister, she and I emerged completely different people. And in my opinion, both of us were stronger and more intuitive and more patient, and so many better things came from such a disastrous situation. I know you have some of your own stories. Is there one personal story in particular that kind of defines that whole concept of resilience for you?
Yeah, I think what was the catalyst for me to get really strong into this work was my third oldest brother passed away by suicide 2 years ago. And when something like that happens, it really shakes the foundation of who you are. It shakes you to your core, because you don't want to believe that that's reality. Then there's these blaming things that you do of yourself and that you do of others. There's this rediscovering how to manage trauma and grief in a very real, visceral way immediately. And it took my family and I a long time, and I think it will be an everlasting thing that we continuously work through and endure, of how we navigate life without him anymore. And how do we become better versions of ourselves? How do we show up more critically for one another, think more strategically about our own well-being and self-care practices, and how we are looking at this whole situation with the resilience mindset, with a growth mindset, because it can be really, really challenging. And after he died, I've always woven in social and psychological behavioral health into my path. I think I've always been fascinated by it. But after he died, I dove full throttle into it. I wanted to learn everything I could in a preventative stance from a public health perspective, because that's my training. And I thought, physical well-being is great and dandy, and I love it, and it feeds our mental health so much. But I would almost argue that your mental well-being is just as much, if not more important than your physical well-being. And resilience is a big part of that.
Yeah, it sure is. And I know I don't know the names of studies, but I remember reading after you spoke, I looked up a couple of things, and it talked about just that idea of the amount of time it takes somebody to rejoin society, to get back into their daily living, to move forward, to kind of have that snapping forward, if you will, is a big indicator in success in relationships, success in business, and all of that, because those times there's no question they're going to come. How quickly, but honestly and authentically, we move forward is very important. Now, are there things, I may be catching you off guard here a little bit, but are there strategies that you suggest or recommend for helping people to kind of practice that, get better at that? Because okay, so great. I'd love to talk about that.
Yeah, I think we tend to, and I was going to talk about this a little bit later in some of the science too, so I'm glad you brought that up. We tend to compartmentalize life in ways that we can. There's categories, and we categorize things because it's the way we think, right? It's easy to say, I'm a teacher, and people know, okay, you're a teacher. But if you have a career or an experience that's maybe not norm, people have a harder time understanding. So then we tend to quantify that and put it in a little box and then tuck it away. Like, oh, this is a little secret in my life. I don't actually want to share this with the people that I know that may be able to help me through it, because it may be too hard for them to understand and or make me sound like I'm a wildly crazy individual. But the reality is, when we are able to talk through the things that we're experiencing, not only are we giving a gift of allowing someone to be in our lives in a really meaningful way, but we're also able to grow and process out loud the things that we're enduring or have endured and are continuing to process, and not just keeping it on the feedback loop in our brains, but how do we continue to open up that dialogue? So I'm a big advocate for talk therapy, whether that's with a therapist or whether that's with somebody in your social support system, that's a family member. Like you said earlier, you and your sister are different people and probably stronger because you went through that thing together and you had to. Right. And your relationship is probably significantly better, I would imagine, that you're able to talk with one another in a trusting, nurturing way, right? When we can talk through our stuff, we can grow tremendously. I think also mindful practices, thinking critically about introspection, slowing down in the moment and being more self-aware of how we're responding to something. We tend to be reactionary as people. We want to constantly go, 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 go. If I fill up all my time with all these different things, then maybe I'll be able to not think about the hard things that are actually going on way back here, right? That stuff comes way up front really quickly if we don't address it, and to slow down and be really critical and mindful of how we're feeling moment to moment, and just maybe even noticing the things around you can be really helpful. Personally, yoga has been a great blend for me. It's how I got into some of this. I remember going to yoga after everything that happened with my brother and just going and crying my eyes out. I just wanted to work out. No, didn't want to think about it. But the ability that sometimes the teachers are able to pull out of people this deep thoughtfulness that we don't really expose ourselves to so much because we are being so reactionary day to day is a really good way to start to cultivate that and strengthen resilience techniques. And not necessarily that yoga needs to be a power vinyasa class. Well, it's really good and it's a huge endorphin hit and a lot of dopamine. It's great for our brains and our bodies, but it can also just be a really good way to heal through movement. And I'm really a big advocate for that, going out into being in nature. I'm so grateful that some of the science today is starting to point to nature as a source of healing. So we think about ourselves in the primitive sense. We're supposed to be outside. We're supposed to be moving, like you said at the beginning of this. We are designed for movement. We are designed to be outside. We coop ourselves up and are on technology all day. We tend to forget that. And I think being in those spaces can be really, really helpful to our well-being.
Yeah, that whole concept of grounding, and it's whether you're running your hand along some bark or you're walking barefoot or whatever you're doing. I mean, you're just like you said, the science has been super impactful for that. And now it's not just kind of tree huggers out there who are actually right. It's reality. And so those are some fantastic resilience techniques. And I just think that's so great. And I think the idea of, you don't show up at the Olympics and run your first race. You train and you train and you train. And so the idea is you don't wait for the suicide or the death or the whatever it is that happens to you. You practice ahead of that. And it's an ongoing practice regardless of what's going on. Yes?
Yes. I'm so glad you brought that up. Actually, I was going to talk a little bit about this as well.
Please.
Dr. Stoltz introduced in 1997 this work around AQ. So we're all familiar with IQ, right? Your intellectual quotient. Your EQ is now a little bit more of a buzz term, but AQ is actually our adversity quotient. And he's found that through going through different adversities, we all experience them, whether they're grandiose or more minute. It's our own introspective determination of how intense that may be. So who's to say that my experience with losing my brother is any more big or small than someone getting in a car accident, right? Same, but different, as the old Southeastern adage goes. But you can change your adversity quotient over time. He's finding it through research that you can improve your own ability to adapt to stressors in your life, regardless of your age, regardless of your background, if you're willing to do the introspective deep work that comes along with that. And it can go up. you can continue to have it go up, which I think is really cool because it gives people who've gone through significant traumas in their life, I think, a little bit of hope that they can come out and be more adverse, to be more agile, to be more resilient. Because just because you've experienced these intensities in your life doesn't mean it has to define who you are and how you navigate the world. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
There's already so many quotes from this show that I just want to type out and put all over my house. Like there's such good stuff. Like this is really, really powerful. And like I was talking to, I was on that girl from Jersey, Erin Saxton out of New York is doing a podcast, and she and I were talking about what self-care is versus what it actually is. Like self-care is not a bubble bath. That's nice. It's lovely. But self-care is the kind of work that you're talking about. It's introspective work. It's knowing yourself. It's soul searching. It's allowing this, you touched on this too, allowing the space for your brain to actually process and not stuff things it needs to work on. And so I think that's this whole concept of resilience and adversity quotient. It's just such interesting work. So thank you for sharing that so much.
Absolutely.
How do you personally sort of marry this into your own life? You've talked about yoga. Are there some other practices? Do you meditate? Is there a nutritional thing that you do that's super supportive of this? What are some things you do in your life?
Yeah, a couple things. One, I try to find gratitudes throughout my day, every day. And that started out kind of hard for me. I remember thinking like, what do I need to be? That doesn't feel natural to be like, oh, I'm so grateful for the sunshine, But in reality, living in the Pacific Northwest, I am really grateful for the sunshine. But also, how can I be grateful for this beautiful home that I've built with my fiance? How can I be grateful for the people in my life, this experience that you're affording me right now, right? This whole new thing that I get to do with you today. And shifting the way that I look at things from I have to do this to I get to do this. It's a gift to be breathing, to be living, to be doing all of this. So taking that with a grain of salt. But along those lines, I do meditate. I am not the best. I'm a very type A person, and I'm constantly thinking about what I got to do after I meditate. But I think just showing up on my mat and just trying is the biggest, most challenging part of it all, really. Once you're in it, it's just being okay with where you are in it. The more I talk with people about it, the more I get others involved. I'm totally one of those people who want to pull people along with me in everything that I do. I'm one of those annoying people, and I always have been. But I think that that's really important because I have a tribe, and along those lines, I have people in my life that I know I can trust and I can lean on, I can talk to that get me. They may not have experienced what I'm experiencing, but they get and love me. And I know that to be true. Also, I think I truly believe in stopping, slowing down, and being more present in the moment. Oprah has taught me that in many ways, so has Eckhart Tolle. But, I have a 5.5-month-old puppy, and there's nothing more joyful to me than rolling on the floor with him and just soaking in all the puppy breath I can. And I think that helps me too. That's totally therapy in my mind. And I've done a lot of work in processing the things that I've experienced, and it's not been easy, but I've put myself through years of therapy in and out and talking it through with someone to be reminded that I can overcome the things that I've experienced and not unloading all that onto my tribe. Because then there's that other side of the coin where we tend to word vomit on the people in our life because we just want someone to hear us, to see us, to know that we're here and we exist. And sometimes that can be really unhealthy for relationships. So getting into somebody who's a qualified clinician who can help, I think, is so valuable.
I agree. And they know how to ask some of the right questions that an unqualified person doesn't necessarily. And I think, especially like things that you've been through, that navigating through that, I would expect it definitely requires somebody with some professional expertise in that area to kind of facilitate. And so I think that's a really good point. And I've even said that to myself. Well, I've got, girlfriends I can talk to, but I know the times that I've spent in counseling, that is a very different experience. And so equally powerful. We all, our girlfriends, we dump on each other or vent to each other and have that experience, and it's wonderful. But I think for progressive type work through specific traumas, like you're mentioning, it's super important. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes, especially as women, we tend to want to unload our stuff, and it can be overwhelming for our partners sometimes, you know, and having somebody who's non-biased, who gets paid to hear me talk about whatever I'm going through, but also gives me homework to improve the way that I think, or to give me different routes of thinking about something.
Yes.
I don't think I would have that I get to do these things token that I take through life with me if I didn't work with somebody on that stuff.
Yeah, I think you even feel differently when for me, that was fitness, is that when I have some family history and personal history that makes it easy for me now to say, I get to do this today. I can't necessarily say that tomorrow. I get to go work out for an hour or an hour and a half or whatever I want to do because I have that gift right now. Yeah. And when we say it that way, it's like the gratitude already sort of bubbles up, and it makes you want to do it more than, oh, I have to go work out. You've already kind of told your brain you don't want to do this. And so that's super great. And I want to make one comment about the slow living. That is, it's so funny because just before I left for Spain in May, I was seeing all this kind of like these slow living bloggers and slow living this. And I'm like, what the hell? And so I'm looking at it and I'm like, oh, and I get to Spain and I'm 3 weeks into Spain and I'm like, they've been doing that for hundreds of years, right? It's like a 2.5 hour lunch is just normal.
Siesta, yeah.
And stuff. So I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so hilarious to now look back at all these bloggers who are promoting slow living when this is a culture. That's just who they are. And you can feel it. And after 3 months of that, coming back, it was a major agitation to my psyche, the pace at which we live. And I could feel myself ramping up to it. It was sort of inevitable to some degree. So like back to what you say, we have to be passionate about putting into our life these practices that you're commenting on, because we're working at a disadvantage, you know, I think already. So I think that's great. Those are some really great ones. I really appreciate that. You present on and off. You're thinking of starting a podcast. How do people get a hold of you if they want to follow Chera and see what you're going to be up to in the next little while?
Yeah, I love that. I am on LinkedIn, just Chera Justice. I think I have some of my credentials on there also. So I'm PHMS. I am on Instagram, also just Chera Justice, Chera_Justice, and Facebook.
Excellent.
And those are great places to start with. And before we pop off, I do want to say and give a big shout out to you, because I see what you're doing in all of the work that you are inspiring people to think critically about the way they move, the way they feel, the way they think, and how nutrition and physical activity play into that. And I do not want to discredit that by any means in some of the work that I've been doing in resilience too, because I think that what we feed our body feeds our brain. And how we think about movement and what we do physically, again, we're designed to move. We need to sweat. We need to sweat every day. So I live by that philosophy of be grateful, sweat a little bit, and eat good, because my body is a temple and I need to feed it well, because I can't think well if I'm lethargic and tired because I ate a huge bagel with cream cheese and all the fixins, right? Because I'm literally lethargic. So I just commend you for inspiring and motivating people in that way, and taking your life on this radical turn and molding it in a way that's really, really inspiring and uplifting. And you're bringing people along with you, and you're cultivating a great tribe through that. So thank you for that. Thank you for inspiring so many.
Thank you so much, and I am grateful for those that are coming along for the ride, and appreciative of anybody who not only watches the show but follows, us in other platforms. So thank you for that a lot. And so, what resources would you direct people to? Are there a particular book or a particular speaker or someone that you would suggest following up with for resilience?
Yeah, great. There's so many. Oh my gosh. I think the first person who comes to mind immediately is Brene Brown, and I'm sure that everyone who's on here is super familiar with her. I read her book. A friend of mine in grad school gave me her book, The Gifts of Imperfection. I thought, excuse me, I am perfect. What is this? And I did not read it for a while. I was like, what is this? Is she trying to, what? She was texting me. It's her nightmare. And then I read it, and I can't put anything that she puts out down. I live and breathe Brene in every kind of way. I think
She's
also,
amazing.
yeah, Oprah's Super Soul Sunday podcast is really something that it's a great way to get out of what you're thinking. It's a short podcast. It's about 25 minutes. And it just helps you think more critically. And she brings in great thought leaders from all over the world who are doing work in being more intentional and self-aware. And this kind of spiritual practice that we're on through living and this gift that we have of life. I think that's also been really helpful for me. Glennon Doyle has also been a great influence in my life. I read her book, Love Warrior, in 2 days. My brother was in the hospital, and I love it. I really resonate with her canary in the coal mine analogy. And I think as far as being critical about other influencers who are out there doing more resilience and mindfulness work, Marianne Williamson comes to mind, and I'm not in a political affiliation by any means. I'm not trying to endorse her for anything, but she thinks really critically about spirituality and what's the purpose of why we're here, and are we just living to live, or do we have a purpose here, and not stifling our own gifts in this world, because it's really none of our business who takes away the greatness that we are able to provide, and we may never even know what that could be. So she is a great advocate for that. Yeah.
Those are some great resources. I'll make sure to put those down below, and so that people, with some links, so people can see that. So that was just a great overview of the whole resilience thing. I've been so intrigued with it ever since I heard you speak earlier this year, last year. When was that?
It was March.
Yeah. March. Oh my gosh, feels like forever ago. And so I know you and I will be circling each other in different ways, professionally and personally, and I'm just so grateful for you. So everybody, if you have questions, we're going to continue the conversation down below, and Chera will check back and provide resources if you guys have more questions, and I will be checking back. And so do please keep the conversation going. We love to talk about this, both she and I, and she is the expert and I am the student. And so I love getting a chance to just kind of pick your brain, Chera, about this very subject. So everybody, as always, Junk Show is always on noon PST on the Well Fit and Fed page. It is sponsored by The Change Cave, a 12-module online membership for women over 40, doing exactly what we're talking about, which is working on fitness, nutrition, and mindfulness practices that are a lot more foundationally grounded and motivating and far-reaching than perhaps what you've been doing right now. And so come join us, because we're doing some great work in there. I'll put the link down below. And Chera, until I see you next time, we will sign off. Stay on just for a little bit once we end the show so I can thank you properly. And to everybody else out there, thanks guys for viewing. I never take it for granted that you guys stop by, even if it's just for a moment. So thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.